I'm director of Russia Policy Initiative and a board member of the Prague Society for International Cooperation. And I just wanted to explain how did it happen that I'm involved in the activities of the House. I know Ilya Ponomaryov for many years. And when it started, this idea came to Ilya's mind. He consulted me asking, so how exactly are we going to do this, and what shall we, who shall we bring in, and the stuff. So from the very beginning, I didn't believe it would be possible, but when it happened, I was excited, and definitely I'm interested to be in and be part of this project. And on behalf of the Prague Society, which is an international institution with a lot of potential, not only in the Czech Republic, we are those who would be a strategic partner of the Free Peoples of Russia House, because someone used to speak Free Russia House, and this is always like, confusion, but anyway. So tonight we are going to talk about the recent and the ongoing changes in Central Europe, and I'm very pleased that our keynote speakers are high-ranked professionals. Let me introduce Réka Szemerkényi and Martin Paulusz, former Hungarian ambassador and former Czech ambassador to the United States. And Martin is also a signatory of Charter 77 and is one of champions of the Czech democracy. The main agenda of this discussion is so what exactly has been happening to the attitude of people who live in Central European countries towards the Russian-Ukrainian war. As one of Russian-speaking activists in Prague, I can tell you that from the very beginning, in March 2022, we had a significant movement of Russian volunteers helping Ukrainian refugees, rallies of several thousand people in the very center of Prague, and a big, rising trend of people who wanted to help. And this is not only about Russians, of course, it's also the huge majority of people in the Czech Republic. And as far as I know, similar tendencies were like all over Europe, including Hungary, even if we know that Mr. Orbán has some specific politics towards the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, but we still know that in 2022, Hungarians helped a lot the Ukrainian refugees, and there was like big sympathy among common people, and so same was happening in Poland, in Romania, Slovakia. But then, in the course of years, it changed. It changed quite drastically, I have to say. And in all these countries, there is a lot of, sad for us narrative, like this is not our war, and politicians who come up with alternative narratives like Czechia for Czech people, or we don't have to help Ukraine anymore because we are short of money. If Brussels wants it, let Brussels do it. So this has been becoming more popular, unfortunately. And so we have to deal with this, to manage this somehow. And why did it happen? And how it reflects in the political changes in these countries. So that's the main agenda. And what are the consequences? And so what shall we expect in the future? And that's what I would like to ask our keynote speakers. And let's start with Martin, please. I think Martin and Réka will speak for like 15 minutes. I'm not going to limit you, but I mean more or less, and then we will pass to Q&A session.
Dennis, thank you. Working?
I think you have to use.
Thank you for being invited for this interesting event. There are so many things to talk about, and I'm just thinking, where should I start from? And certainly, to be fair, I would like to start from my life experience. I got to know Václav Havel when I was very young in 1968. In the fall, I was in the first year student at university, and I was inviting actually him as our speaker, and then we got together under all sorts of circumstances leading to Charter 77. So we had this experience together. But before that, after 68, I realized in Czechoslovakia, in the time of normalization and after the Soviet-led invasion in August of that year, that I could not, it was not, I would say, just courageous. I couldn't stand it. So I tried to find some way how to deal with the situation on my personal level. And I discovered philosophy. It looks like a strange thing to start from in this context, but philosophy, I think, is an extremely important element that should be brought into our discussion today. Philosophers simply know that before any answers, you need to look at questions, and that these questions maybe are more relevant than answers, and you know that some answers are failed or problematic from the very beginning. I was a student of Jan Patočka, Czech philosopher, who together with Václav Havel became one of the first spokespersons of Charter 77. So we had this experience and exposed to interstate process called Helsinki process that started in 1975. I'm mentioning that because I think that some sort of Helsinki inspiration, I see Don Ritter, he might be able to tell us something from the US perspective in this context, is extremely important today. And I have here a text written by Finnish President Alexander Stubb that was already available in December this year, but it will be published only now. And Finnish President, 7 million Finns, and founding fathers of this idea. He has also interesting capability of communicating with a current US president because he's a good golfer and he is a big player. But I'm saying that for one reason, that obviously we all know that we are living now on the crossroads. That we certainly, Central Europeans, can bring in our own experience of our transition from communism to democracy, which means miraculous year 1989 and 1990 and onwards. It's fair to say that Hungarian, Polish, Czechoslovak, and Romanian experience of transition were very different, but still we were in it together. We wanted to get rid of totalitarian regime, whatever methods were used to enslave the population, and made it. So obviously one can expect that I would be maybe expressing somewhat different position from what Hungarian perspective is, but I'm not going to do that. Because Visegrad cooperation, communication, it seems to me that it is still relevant in spite of the fact that maybe some political statements or policies are different. And Viktor, or Orbán Viktor, as you like to say, you know, I met Viktor Orbán way back when he was still young man and leader of his party, and he started some sort of revolution in Hungary. I was with President Havel in the very first meeting of that led to Visegrad cooperation It was in Bratislava, I guess in April most likely, 1990. We were there, Havel and his delegation, we were pretty much consistent, but the leader of Polish delegation was General Jaruzelski, because he was still president. You know, he was replaced by Valenza only in December or November of that year. So it was a strange moment when we could see our friends Adam Michnik and Bronia Geremek and others in delegation led by the guy who just put them into jail a couple of years before. And even this strange constellation produced something very positive, because we had reason to communicate and to cooperate. Obviously, you can immediately add, and which is important, history. Czech history and Hungarian history are different stories, and I can go on and on. But in spite of all these differences, I think that dialogue and some sort of cooperation was very, very important. So even in spite of the fact that all politicians are, I would say, tempted to be populist, because after all they need to win democratic elections, they still are operating in reality. Reality we are confronted with is challenging. We still need to deal with these questions and try to keep a dialogue going on. If we have, you know, the most dangerous thing is to stop talking, coming up with all sorts of answers to questions without being able to examine what it is doing with reality. I would like to declare myself as an empiricist. What's happening in the real world, I think, is always more important than statements. You know, your US president likes to make his statements, and they are making many people angry. As a former diplomat, I say, okay, let's see what he is going to achieve by this or that. But still, we Visegrad countries have set an opportunity. We are still not lost. I am not trying to tell you that the world is going to hell because of this or that. In every situation, we need to try to keep our way and try to help ourselves and people who might be like-minded. Obviously, Russian story is different from Czech story. I like Denis because we very often meet in Prague and talk. And he's Russian, I'm Czech, so I can easily tell him certain things we don't like in Russian presence in our part of the world. But still, I think that some sort of open-mindedness, solidarity, being able to come up with new ideas, with fresh ideas, and test them against reality, that it is still something that we really need to keep on, and not being only frustrated that there are so many stupid people around ourselves. You know, there is an old saying that ancient gods were very powerful and they tried to control the world, but there was one thing they could not handle. And you know what it was? Human stupidity. Because that's what humans are by their very nature. But we are all stupid, but we at least can try to control our folly, our stupidity, and maybe come with something better. And in this moment in the world, I think that there is something what we need to take into consideration. I don't want to sound like a naivist or stupid idealist. I think that there is a chance. If we, for instance, take what Finnish president is telling us, that Helsinki inspiration can maybe be interesting inspiration that even small countries, and this is the whole story of the Helsinki process, can do something to help bigger countries to achieve their own goals. And I would not be saying that all Russians are born slaves sitting in their small villages and waving flags to hail the king or emperor. That there is an alternative, and we need to do anything possible to make this alternative reality. Last thing what I'm going to say, I would like to declare myself to be old scholastic. There is an important wisdom of these medieval thinkers, distinguere sed non separare. We must be able to make distinctions, but we cannot separate things. Like in Helsinki process, there are three baskets: peace and security. Leonid Brezhnev thought that he made it in 1975, and he got all other European countries to sign the final document. On the other side, you have human dimension, third basket, which is something what I think we need now also to be aware of. This was the spirit of Charter 77. But in between, you have second basket, some sort of transactionalism, cooperation in area of business, science, industry, and so on and so forth. So it might be something that can even attract those leaders that are trying to reshape or remodel the world today. New geopolitical situation and big powers being responsible for the stability of the world, and even not respecting the rules or just promoting their own interest. I can talk a lot about this Monroe Doctrine, Monroe Doctrine adopted by Donald Trump for the 21st century, and what we see now with Venezuela and all other Latin American countries. But let's try to use opportunities. And I think that what Finnish president says is extremely important. And this is something to be thought through and maybe transform into action. I know that very sensitive thing here is Russians and Ukrainians. And I would like to again say, please, distinguere sed non separare. We may, the Russian and Ukrainian question are two different questions. We know that, but we also know that they cannot be separated. That whatever you do on the first one has a fatal implication for the other one and vice versa. So anything we can do to bring together those people who prefer open society and not dictatorship, who maybe are economists and trying to promote their economic private interests, should also be limited in their private efforts by public good. And public good is something that I think that we can share all, in spite of the fact that we come from different perspectives, have different opinions. I'm a Roman Catholic, so I don't think that everybody needs to share my religious view. I think that atheists, Protestants, Orthodox, Muslim, all of them can be participating in debate on public good. And this is, I think, good start, and I'm very happy to have here my Hungarian colleague. Current Czech government certainly is different from the previous one. How much it is different, we can go one step after another. But as a former diplomat, I have many friends and spies at Foreign Ministry of the Czech Republic. They keep telling me what's going on there. There will be much more continuity than discontinuity. Obviously, political speeches before the election and then implementation of policy, they are two different things. And so we don't need and should not be pessimistic. We should be action-oriented. And there is a space that needs to be filled with good ideas. Some stupid answers should be turned back to questions. And we all like to say that dialogue is important. But do we see enough dialogue today? There are many people living in their own small worlds and communicating on with people they can agree with. You have it here, you have it everywhere. But the Helsinki process might have been this opportunity that there was some common denominator, some ideas, some expectation. So let's keep on going with that. And Czechs and Hungarians and Poles and Slovaks, if we want to speak about Visegrad cooperation, have different governments, different problems, but still, I believe that our Central European exposure to communism in the past is much more important than political differences and historical differences. So let's keep going and having a dialogue.
Thank you, Martin. Martin is a big visionary, and we will have to ask him like more questions about connections of his, big picture vision and what's happening now. And you have time to prepare your question. And right now, the floor is yours, Réka.
Thank you. Thank you also for the this invitation. I'm very glad that we can be here, and I thank you also for your interest. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to meet and talk. And thank you for these thoughts, and especially the last thought, which is very much something that I find very important. And I think this is really a foundation for the next decade to come. How much these experiences, this understanding of history that our societies have gone through is going to be still keeping up those values that we inherited and we have. And I think Hungary is in a very interesting situation from that point of view. So I'm very glad that we can talk now. To your question, to the question of the day, how have political processes and especially elections been influenced or can be influenced by external priorities and political forces? I think one of the most interesting cases probably goes back to the previous elections in Hungary, which was 2022, right after or soon after Russia attacked Ukraine, because that was the first very clear election in which a lot of the analyses said that there was a massive kind of criticism of the government. There was a kind of a cooperation of the opposition, which was wobbly and it was not clear. They didn't really like the leader of the opposition, who was seen as an outsider, more or less. There was a lot of internal tension among the various parties of the opposition, but still there were analyses that indicated that there was a chance for the first time after 3 successful electoral terms that the governing Fidesz was going to kind of lose the elections. Not lose, but there were analyses half a year before showing an increasing force of this critical mass in the society. The narrative, however, of shifting into the anti-war emphasis, those messages of keeping Hungary out of the war, keeping this focus on the military confrontation very close by Hungary's borders, totally changed the discourse of the campaign, totally changed the focus of the electorate. Just the last few months before the electoral decision that they were to make, and the majority of the analysis that we could see afterwards, which saw the result of a two-thirds majority, of a fourth two-thirds majority of Fidesz and of Viktor Orbán, showed that this focus on the war itself, the threat of the war, was itself enough to counterbalance everything else. Okay, the opposition was not strong. Okay, they did not have a leadership. They were not really intent to kind of go into the political. Many analysis said that many of the opposition leaders were not even interested in really winning, but still this narrative of the war was kind of pervasive. So where are we now after, it was not just an electoral victory, it was a 2/3 majority, a fourth time for the governing Fidesz, which is massive because for everything, you know, for any change in constitution is possible with a 2/3 majority. So all the biggest kind of political shifts or decisions can be pushed forward or can be brought forward with a 2/3 majority in the Hungarian constitutional structure. So it's really not insignificant, you know, to have. First, it was not insignificant to have a fourth electoral victory in a row, but also to have such a massive victory. Very interestingly, I think that was also a moment when kind of the logic of the Prime Minister himself shifted into a different kind of framework or a different approach to international questions after these elections. Probably also because of the nature of the electoral success or the campaign messages. Partly because you know, he's been Prime Minister for 3 terms before. He'd been Prime Minister for 3 terms before, so some say he must have been kind of bored by just focusing always on domestic issues. But fundamentally, he shifted out of the domestic political discussion after the previous elections and shifted his emphasis and his focus primarily on international issues. So focusing on big geopolitical questions, and he is seen as a big visionary, and he has always taken opportunities to outline his international, his analysis of international developments and his understanding of where the world is going. So it has been always a characteristic of his biggest speeches, but that was the moment when he fundamentally kind of left governance to some of the political leadership in his in the party and shifted his attention to kind of what was called the Eastern Opening, to developing new ties with China primarily and opening up the Hungarian economy and the Hungarian businesses, and then culturally and historically focusing on the Eastern roots of the Hungarians. And developing massive relationship on all levels with China and the Far East, and then of course with the kind of the Central Asian countries as well, as an outflow of that logic. But also to focus on geopolitical questions, and so getting massively involved in values issues. Which was, primarily coming from the growing tensions and growing internal tensions about migration in the European societies, which was, of course, a big challenge was an increasingly a big challenge in Europe, and the kind of rise of the woke culture in the U.S., which he was very much about to focus on. So the interesting thing to me as a pre-1990, I was brought up on Radio Free Europe, so I was very much part of the demonstrations in Hungary, not having had the chance to be there earlier enough, but before 1990, being part of these demonstrations, it was a very clear value set, for the Hungarian society that you could always sense since 1990. And, coming from communism, that was democratic society, believing in free enterprise, in all the freedoms, and Western international organizations and values that bind Hungary into, the European kind of history and culture. Now, increasingly over these years, the emphasis of the Prime Minister was shifting away from this kind of very consistent set of values, which included, yes, a focus on, as conservatives, a focus on families, on traditional, culture and history, but also on free enterprise, free democracies, and anti-Russian, very clear pro-Western attitudes. And what you could see gradually and increasingly was kind of a cutting off of a certain part of this value set, or de-emphasizing a certain part of the value set, or reframing one of the parts of this value set into a new one. And shifting away from the anti-Russian narrative was increasingly clear, at the same time, kind of probably because when you cut off some part, you want to emphasize by increasing focus on the other one. So a massive shift over to the pro-family approach, which was always there, or pro-Christianity even in Hungary, which was always there, but it was not kind of, Hungary is a mess, unfortunately, or a non-practicing, society in which Christianity has a cultural meaning more than a religious one. So the number of people who go to church has not been, defining, and it was on the decline anyways. But now, with a massive support that the government has been giving financially to the various churches, to all the big churches in Hungary, and the massive narrative on emphasizing that was kind of counterbalancing the changing narrative on Russia. And I think that's what you can see as a result now, because yes, thank you so much for remembering, yes, in 2022, when the war was launched, there was a big openness and a huge support, very genuine, from the part of the Hungarian society to open up and support the refugees, and the concern was very much, personal, humanitarian, very much understanding. There was, I don't know, all of my friends were receiving, Ukrainian families in their homes. So I don't even know a family who would not have been involved in one way or another. But over the past 4 years, all the statistics show that the support for Ukraine and the criticism of Ukraine has declined and increased. So there's a shift, a change in the public opinion, unfortunately, which is becoming not just, especially, the kind of the hard Fidesz supporters have become increasingly understanding of the pressures on Russia and why Russia had to attack Ukraine, that it was not really that it was really a provoked war. It was not an unprovoked attack, but the rationale behind is the West, all the narratives that you can hear here. But the interesting thing is that it shows in the public opinions in many ways also. And I think that just shows, the power of a political narrative, if it's coming from a political leader that has a high reputation and has a solid, followership. So I think it's a very important and very worrying sign in the society itself. Now, where are we now? And how do we face the elections coming up in the spring of 2026? Because it's in April. Well, it has not been announced yet, so we don't know officially, but it's kind of thought to be April 12. It will be announced probably in the next few weeks, so it will come soon. I think, what is interesting is that this parallel to this shift in public opinion away, or being more critical of Ukraine and being more understanding of Russia, which is, like I said, more characteristic of the Fidesz electorate than of the rest of the society, but they are more or less, 50% or under 50% or so of the public opinion polls, is is just one of the discussions. And of course, this is not the defining discussion in the electoral campaign. Foreign policy should not be, even in other, I mean, in many countries, it doesn't even appear among the first few topics. Normally, societies have our societies, especially in Central Europe, have a common understanding of the importance of Europe and of NATO membership, of the foundations, and of our concerns of Russia as well. It is, however, likely to remain a defining force in the elections in 26 in Hungary as well. So not just can we conclude from the previous elections that it was one of the defining forces to raise the support for Fidesz in the electoral campaign, but that it is continuously in the campaign, so much so that if you go in Hungary, I wish we had, because I was wondering if I could do some slides, you see these giga posters, on the side, which we used to have under socialism, the huge posters, just showing Zelensky and von der Leyen as the people for war. And showing, of course, or the implicating that the leader of the Hungarian opposition, Péter Magyar, is with them. So it's kind of, these are the people for war in the big, giga posters. And the main message of the Prime Minister continues to be that he is the one person for peace in Europe. And he's doing that despite all the European pressures on him and on Hungary as a result to give support to Ukraine, because his message is that by supporting Ukraine, you are supporting the war effort. So that's one of the themes, and that's kind of the main message on the giga posters heading for the elections. And this message of putting, Péter Magyar and the new TISA party together with Zelensky and von der Leyen, the pro-war forces of the world. But this is not the only topic, and there's 2 or 3 other very important topics that are driving people's thinking about the elections this time, and I think it's very important to note. One of them is going at the very heart of the Fidesz, the new Fidesz identity. I mean, the new Fidesz by saying, by cutting off this pro-Western, or working on cutting off this pro-Western element of the conservative value set, or anti-Russian, anti-Soviet, whatever, or Russia concerns feeling in the Hungarian conservatives, and replacing it or kind of balancing it with a larger emphasis on the family focus, on societal values and of Christianity. This family has been a major kind of the positive message of the government for like the last 2 terms, maybe 2.5 or so. Massive, giga posters about Hungary being a family-friendly country and focusing on those values. Here in Washington, is the main message is, this is part of the anti-woke effort and cooperation with Washington. This is an element of working together with the American Republicans. So it's a very important messaging part. The results, in the real life in Hungary, and I like very much your empirical approach, I also believe we have to be empiricists, is that the birth rate in Hungary has been lower than ever. The number of children born is lower than probably the lowest number was like 1985 or something. So we're now under the 1985 figures. Despite all the government effort, narrative, money, support, focus, you name it, there are fewer children born in Hungary than before, than before the Orbán government, the free before, so it's like 16 years ago now. So 16 years was not not just not reversing the trend, but making the trend faster. So sometimes I'm so sorry to say to our friends in the U.S. as well. I mean, my friends in the U.S. that when they're praising Hungarian family policies, sure, if you want to have fewer children, that's the line to follow. It's like this has been successful in reducing the number of children being born, and unfortunately, this is a big problem in the Hungarian society. Now we were always saying we're a nation of 10 million. I was brought up on Hungary as a nation of 10 million, tiny, but still. Now we're under 9.5. And we're heading to 9.2, and it's very massively so I think it's so anyways, this is not what I wanted to say, sorry. Diversion, but an important element because family messaging is very important for the government. And what I wanted to say, however, is that the biggest scandal of the domestic scene that really hurts Fidesz and really hurts people's feeling on a very personal level is a series of skeletons falling out of the government's cupboard, if I can say that, related to charges on pedophilia and negative treatment of children in orphanages, which is like, just a year and a half ago, how Fidesz's big opposition party started was a case of the then president giving pardon to a person who was convicted because of supporting a pedophile director of an institution. And she gave pardon to this guy, which was like creating a massive, negative wave in the population, also including Fidesz voters, for whom, okay, they may be kind of not understanding the Russia thing and maybe following the new Fidesz line on Russia or on Ukraine, but hurting children is a very different thing, and they really find that horrible, especially in this case. So the president had to resign, the Minister of Justice had to resign, who were signing it, and it's the Minister of Justice's former husband who was kind of propelled into politics because of that scandal 2 years ago, launching a political movement which quickly developed into a political party that is called now TISA party. They first reached I have some of the figures, they first reached the level of Fidesz's support after 1 year only. So they came from nowhere, and within a year, this political formation was catching up with the strong and solid Fidesz basis. And now, if we're heading towards the elections, like the latest polls came out in November, December 25, what I can say is that TISA is leading in the overall population by 5%. If you go into various different categories, among those who call themselves voters who are sure to go to vote, so those who are convinced that they are going to vote, TISA is on 57%. I mean, in different age groups, sorry, that's what I want to call. So TISA is on 57% among people from between 18 and 40, and Fidesz is on 14%. If we go one age level higher, between people between 30 and 65, TISA is on, okay, no, first, so yeah, TISA is on 63 and Fidesz is on 15. Over 65, it's where it changes. Then Fidesz is on 49 and TISA is on 21. So it's really the people, the generation of above 60 and above, where Fidesz has a lead. But TISA, in every age group under that, is leading. And among the youngest voters, it's leading by a 2/3 majority. So it's a massive shift of public opinion. And you can see this age difference comes up in every electoral, every public opinion poll polling station, except for those who work for Fidesz. So they have a continued, they produce numbers that show that they are going to be, they're still leading. But I think it's very interesting. Another very interesting shift is reflected in the fact that usually, Fidesz was strongest in the countryside, in all, not just countryside meaning, very rural places, but also countryside meaning the cities in the countryside. So, opposition was strong, small towns as well. So the opposition forces were strongest, of course, in Budapest, as all capitals kind of have that. But then when you were looking at the smaller cities in the countryside, Fidesz was already stronger, and you go to lower numbers of settlements, and the lower the number, the higher the support for Fidesz. So there was a kind of a traditional approach. Now, in the most recent polls, what we can see is that even in the cities in the countryside, so it's not just Budapest, but the larger cities in the countryside, Fidesz's dominance is gone. They are in majority supportive of TISA as a TISA party. And you have to go down to as low as settlements of 1,000 to have a Fidesz dominance. So even in the countryside, what you can see, there's a shift of public opinion. And also, there's a shift in public opinion in the rankings of education level. For instance, previously, Fidesz used to be kind of attracting a lot of the intellectuals, doctors, and when it was a real conservative party, okay, real conservative, little business leaders, doctors, teachers, there was massively, conservative. Now, there is a Fidesz dominance in one kind of educational level. There is those who have 8 years of school. Under that level, Fidesz is leading. Above 8 years of schooling, so even people with high school education and universities, there is a dominance, there's a majority of the opposition. So it is a kind of a very different, situation now. I don't want to go into...
I feel like we have to go to Q&A.
Absolutely. I don't want to go into more details of this, but I think, to understand where we are and what are the dominant forces or the thinking, these are kind of the basic pillars to understand what's going on.
Right. So,
can you give me 1 minute?
Sure.
Look, I will start from the American side. Donald Trump declared himself with his MAGA supporters as an isolationist because he was just to think about well-being of these people somewhere out there. And he turned out to be the biggest globalist as you can imagine. So what I'm saying is that even small Central European countries like Orbán Viktor and Andrej Babiš, they would like to serve their people. That's what their major message in political campaign is. I'm going to take care about you, and we need to spend not too much money sending weapons here and there to Ukraine or whatever. But at the same time, they cannot escape because of the state of the world. All these bigger questions. And obviously, if you are running an empire like the United States, you have a different perspective. But tragedy of Orbán Viktor and maybe Andrej Babiš is that they want to keep their small, maybe middle-sized country in Central Europe free. But they are almost paralyzing or destroying all basic elements that can guarantee this freedom. It is the unity of NATO, the capability of Europe to react in the right manner to the current challenges. I'm not supporting all these progressivistic discourses in Europe, but still we need to go back to our tradition, to beginning of Europe and be partner of Americans and democratic people all over the world, including Russia. So I think that this is a dilemma. Election is certainly something that you need to get your voters, mobilize them and get more votes than your opponents. But it is a kind of risky game. This time, Central Europeans had their own experiences. Czechs in 1938, 1948, 1968, Hungarians also can speak about that. So I think that this is a context we need to have in mind.
Yeah, well, at this point, I would like to emphasize on the fact that we are talking here about the ability of the European Union to be resilient with regards to the existential threat of Putin's Russia. And even changes in small countries matter here at this point. And so that's actually what I'm not curious, but well, it's very important for me. I just want to realize where exactly do Central European countries move, and so thank you for your insight. And I think that people sitting in this room have a lot of questions. So let's just maybe. We have here former U.S. Congressman Don Ritter. Maybe we could start with your remark.
What is the status what is the status of the assistance to Ukraine? Is there going to be a negative push by the Orbán wing of the Hungarian party towards Ukraine? And what is the status of the opposition party towards, what is their perspective on the war in Ukraine?
Thank you. So Orbán has been very critical about most of the EU decisions on sanctions against Russia over since the beginning of the war. But ultimately, Hungary, as a member of the EU, voted for all of the sanctions packages in the last minute. When it did not, there were a few instances when they really did not want to. Then the solution was, for instance, he was asked to walk out for those, 5 minutes or 10 minutes when the election was held. So he was not kind of stopping, the EU from going forward with the sanctions packages that were being discussed at the particular instances. Which is kind of has become kind of the routine, I think, since 2022. TISA party, the new opposition party, joined the European People's Party, so they are within the EPP, and the EPP leadership is probably among the strongest. Supporters of Ukraine, of understanding the importance of standing with Ukraine. So I think that kind of a political family is an indication of where they stand. This is a hot issue, a very hot issue, of course, because no matter what is being discussed, or no matter from what area the questions come up, when the experience of the campaign 4 years ago is like the I don't know, the shadow of on everybody, because 4 years ago the opposition leader, who was a very conservative guy, was kind of leading the cooperation of an opposition of, left liberal parties, from whatever. He was asked about, what he thinks on supporting, I think it was, should NATO support Ukraine or something along those lines? And he said, yeah, well, if NATO is supporting, then we're with NATO, and we will have to cooperate and go in. And the entire mechanism of Fidesz was just, Fidesz, media was kind of like launched against the opposition, saying, "Oh, yeah, yes, they want to bring your sons to the war, and that's what they're going to be doing." So this is like, so just like 2 days ago, Péter Magyar himself, or maybe just yesterday, there was a big international media briefing of the Prime Minister in the morning, and then of the opposition leader, Péter Magyar, in the afternoon. And this question was asked, and one of his first comments was, yes, we commit that we don't want to bring Hungary into war, and this is very important for, but his other messages that we're very much in the European Union. We definitely want to be, stronger in the European Union, more cooperative, not always, blocking everything, and also as NATO members, the commitment is very strong. So this is how it's kind of perceived, I think, by most of the public, that people have started to have concerns about Orbán's and Fidesz's wanting to stay in the European Union, and this is a question that comes up every now and then. Prime Minister Orbán has to kind of every now and then kind of publicly say, no, we would never leave the European Union, and this is not in the intention. But at the same time, he always also says things like, it's only worth for Hungary to stay in the EU as long as we get the monies from them. And since there's no money coming from Brussels for the last 2 years now, at least, people may have questions. So this is a kind of it's an issue hovering. Yeah, it's fluid on his behalf. It's not fluid on the side of Péter Magyar. He is very strong on saying, not only is Hungary a committed member of the European community of nations and of the European values, but he says that Hungary should join the European legal system, court system, so that we can to increase transparency, for instance, because corruption is the third big issue of the campaign period, because there's so much kind of wealth accumulated in some very narrowly defined circles that is becoming a major issue. So Péter Magyar's reaction to that is to turn more towards the European transparency standards. So I think in that sense, this whole issue is very much, kind of very sensitive in the campaign. Yes, I can.
I think that, again, I don't think that this resolve the problem. Orbán Viktor believes that he has opened the door to White House and Mar-a-Lago, and that there is a strong cooperation between Trump's America and Hungary. With all due respect to Hungarian statements, it's a highly asymmetric relationship, and I don't think that Donald Trump would be willing to support Hungarian cause. He's supporting his own causes. So I think that a strong European connection and a strong transatlantic bond is important for Hungary no matter what. And so I think that this is something what we need to keep sending messages to both Orbán Viktor and whoever is going to replace him after election in April or in spring this year. This is something extremely important. And I think that even Orbán knows about that. Obviously, he's a populist. He has his own constituencies. But I think that he's not that stupid. I think that he has some wisdom in himself.
Here is a question of this lady.
Thank you very much, Maria Snegovaya, CSIS. Thank you for excellent presentation. Quick question to Réka. Full disclosure, I've been to Budapest this summer, and you cannot play a single YouTube video without an ad that shows two eggs which hatch, and from them jump out Peter Magyar and Zelensky, and they start dancing and playing together as a propagandist ad of Orbán against, clearly, Peter. Hinting at his pro-Ukrainian sentiment. So, Réka, what I don't understand is Hungarian population. Like the 1956, you would think that a lot of sentiment there in Hungary among people should be about Russian invasion and negatives. Like, what do you think it is about Hungarian public that makes them still not being, obviously, 50% not very much supportive of Ukraine compared to other countries of the region? Why Orbán is able to manipulate that? And my second question, you flagged that changing polls to Fidesz is one reason of his decline. What is the role of the cutoff of the European subsidies? Does the economic factor play a role in the decline in the approval? And to what extent do you think the possibility of changing of the EU voting rules from majoritarian to plurality, which potentially will help EU defend themselves against Orbán, who frankly is a huge annoyance, will actually also play a role? Do people talk about it in Hungary? Is that a threat? Is it a legitimate threat? And to our Czech ambassador, because of the ANO victory in this election, right, what do you think it means for pro-Ukrainian course in Czech Republic? Is Hungarian experience seen by ANO and the voters as a good example to follow? And does it mean less support for Ukraine from the Czech going forward?
Thank you for this question. And let's start with Hungary. Let's start with the Czech Republic.
Okay, I will start with the Czech Republic. First of all, Havelian absurdities and Kafka's paradoxes. Our biggest Czech nationalist is Slovak, combined with Japanese. So it's a little bit strange, but what I've already said, in spite of these rhetorics, there will be much more continuity of policies with the previous government. You know, there is a similarity with the United States. For Donald Trump, the worst president ever in the United States was his predecessor, Joe Biden. So the worst president ever, worst prime minister ever in Czech history for Mr. Babiš is his predecessor, Peter Fiala. Obviously now we need to, and we do need to respect democracy, which means that one party won, or one group won, so they are in charge now, so they should have a chance to do what they want to do. But at the same time, they are confronted now with realities. Not just with their own slogans, they need to do real things. And I think that my bet is we will see much more continuity with the previous government because they have money, they can increase taxes, they can do this or that. But I think that they will try to do the best to combine, I would say, their rhetorics with reality checks. And actually we are seeing it right now. The foreign minister has traveled to Kyiv and first he invited Ukraine ambassador, and because ambassador was not very happy about the statement made by Mr. Okamura, who is the president of the parliament, and then they had a quite positive conversation. So I think that there will be much more pragmatism and realism and real diplomacy than that. So maybe I'm wrong, but I think that that's my hunch.
So there's like three questions, all worth, going into depth, but just briefly, how could the Hungarian society change that much? I think is a question that really is making us think a lot. Also, what is the how could this happen? What is the real root of this development? And I think there's several elements for sure. There's not one reason. Yes, some say Viktor Orbán is a very powerful, very charismatic speaker, and if he's a very charismatic leader, and if he is speaking, on a topic in a particular way, that is going to kind of have an impact, which is totally, yeah, sure. But I think what is interesting is a phenomenon that we can see in the U.S. as well. The phenomenon is that Russia has consistently for over a decade and a half been working on a narrative of showing Russia as the defender of Christianity, and the kind of, which is, however far it is from reality, the impact of showing Europe, and the whole thing I think started with Europe, showing Europe losing its values that go back to the Judeo-Christian roots of Greek and Roman, traditions, but losing that all for a woke culture, for a culture in which you cannot say certain things because of these radical liberal, pressures on the society, versus, and losing your own values, versus a Russia that is defending those traditional, Christian values, is very powerful. And it has been consistent. So it's been on, this narrative has been massively coming. So unfortunately, that's one thing, why and how a country that, my father was a 56er. I was very proud to be, and every night I was going to sleep when I was a kid thinking, what would I have done if I had been there in 56? And that was like the measure. And I believe it is a measure for Hungarian society to kind of say, where you are. It continues to be so. But the more recent and the most powerful feeling that they get in through this continuous, Brussels criticism of, Brussels really losing these values and ruining the values of the very core of the European Union is powerful. And parallel to that, if you have a positive force of a defender of Christianity, then it's Russia. So that, I think, is a narrative that should be taken very seriously. And I can see that narrative coming from Washington as well. And that is making me even more worried, because what I can see is that a lot of the this narrative is echoed strongly in very important circles in Washington, in the U.S. as well. And I think, of course, yes, they are people who are not Russia experts. They are people who are not focusing on international relations. They're not people who are focusing on security policy. They're focusing on just values in their lives, and I respect that, and it's very important. But I think this false narrative is very dangerous for a long-term understanding of where we are strategically vis-a-vis Russia. So I think it's important. Remind me. Oh, the economic developments. So in most economic indicators that we have in the European Union about GDP growth, inflation, about various social impacts of economic developments, Hungary has worked itself way down to the bottom of the European ranking. And that is a big problem, I think, that it's very difficult to, that people feel on an everyday level. And of course, there's different indicators, but massively on a large societal level, this problem is felt. And part of it is the lack of the European support that is not coming for like the third year in a row, which is missing big time. I think there was an intent to replace these with China's investments. That's not as big as it was expected to be. Although for the kind of the everyday living standards. In terms of overall FDI, Chinese FDI, Hungary is the biggest recipient of Chinese FDI in the European Union. Hungary in itself receives more Chinese foreign direct investment than the three big combined, Germany, France, and Italy. So it's big. It is big. It is big. And the response to, I mean, the political response to this, when there is a criticism coming from Washington of saying, you know, Chinese investments is a problem, you know, what are you going to, you know, how are you going to manage that? And the reaction, the official reaction has been a very firm no. We're not going to, the government has repeatedly said that they were not going to reconsider or even start decreasing the openness to Chinese FDI. So I think that's a potential point of conflict that is not clear. And you had the majority what? Oh, in the EU. So yeah, I have to say that although the Prime Minister Orbán has used the veto power in a very visible and very powerful way, in many instances, ultimately EU decision makers found ways to get around it, and that's a legal question. And yes, of course, we have to kind of keep the cooperation of the union in many ways to be able to go forward. But I think, you know, there has been new ways that allowed the EU to go forward, even on a regular kind of decision-making questions, without completely overwriting the whole EU system. So they could still, you know, figure out, and I think the impact of the threat of veto has become much lower in the last year and a half than it was before. In addition to that, I think creating a completely parallel structure of strategic decision making, which is what is being done now in the coalition of the willing, of those countries that are willing to support Ukraine and are kind of focusing on the strategic element of the cooperation, parallel to the EU, but not kind of against it, but involving Turkey, which I think is very important, and involving the UK, which I think is very important. I think that's something to watch. And that, I think, we have those countries of the EU that are very clear on understanding the strategic importance of Ukraine and of supporting Ukraine. So I think there's both inside the EU, there are mechanisms that are being used on a legal foundation that have been proven efficient, and even the invention of a parallel structure is an unusually strategic element. I mean, sorry, I have been critical of the EU not being strategic enough. So I have always thought that we need to find ways in the European Union to be more understanding of and prioritizing security policy decisions, a strategic understanding of international developments, of how to become real partners to Washington. You know, we have to have not just the military capabilities, but the thinking, the logic, the knowledge, the information, you know, 724 of what's happening in the world. So we have to develop a lot of those, and there was no structure for that. I think this coalition of the willing can be a structure for that. The question is, you know, of course, we have elections in all of those countries. There's a massive Russian interest in supporting those political elements in all of those countries that are against this. So I think what you can see is it's going to be challenged in many ways.
You had a question?
Yes. My name is David Hoffman, and I'm here at the first time visiting this remarkable institution. And I only heard about this event a week or so ago, and I said I must be here. So I'm the vice president for programs of an organization that's in DuPont Circle, and I'm about to invite Denis. I'm about to invite our ambassador, Réka, our Ambassador Martin Martin, and I would like to also give a nod to Congressman Don Ritter. We spoke very briefly earlier. Once upon a time, I worked for a fellow then in the House, Congressman Ed Markey. Well, yes, he was, but you know, you guys worked together, as I recall. So anyway, here's my point, Denis and Martin and Réka and Don and everyone. I am the vice president for programs of the Women's, yeah, I'm a man, the Women's National Democratic Club, which is in DuPont Circle. The Women's National Democratic Club was founded in 1922 by the suffragist women who fought for the right to vote. Now, we have all, so I'm almost done with my, and there will be a question. I see, I sometimes moderate events too, so I with due deference to that. So I'm about to pop the question. So we have a lot of programs and events and speakers. So here's the question, and it's for Ambassador Réka, it's for Martin. I think it would be ideal if a congressman like Don Ritter, if you would agree to speak on these central issues of American values and politics, Central European values and politics, elections, Russian. In other words, if we can somehow recreate over in DuPont Circle at our mansion, the Whittemore House, a block from Metro, there in DuPont Circle, the Women's National Democratic Club, men are members too. So my question is, lingering afterwards, I would like to seal the deal and get the former congressmen, the former ambassadors to agree to speak and recreate this event. This has been marvelous.
I don't think that we need an answer for this, but thank you anyway.
Thank you, Matthias Smitman. I've got a question concerning the divergence of interest between the United States and Europe towards Russia. And I want to preface it by saying the United States originally backed Ukraine, and the narrative was you have a democratic, liberal, free market, respecting human rights country like Ukraine, which is brutally invaded by an authoritarian regime headed by this thug, Vladimir Putin, doesn't respect human rights, doesn't respect its neighbors, invades its neighbors, Georgia, Abkhazia, now Ukraine, and that if Russia's not stopped, they'll seize Ukraine, it'll be a Munich moment, and then they'll start and they'll seize, the rest of Moldova, Transnistria, they'll look into the Baltic states, and this will just be, you'll be appeasing Putin, and he won't stop until he's recreated the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union. Various versions of this narrative were quite popular. But over time, it seems like again, this was mostly during the Biden administration. The current Trump administration, there were quite a few neocons that supported this, supported a very robust, rigorous effort to provide military, economic, intelligence assistance to the Ukrainian government. But over time, there was a recognition that maybe Russia really was provoked, and the expansion of NATO, which occurred during the unipolar moment after 1990, in which Russia was extremely weak and really couldn't do anything to object, and you had several rounds of NATO expansion, and the next was going to be Ukraine and Georgia at the 2008 NATO summit, and that Russia really did see this as much as the U.S. can invoke the Monroe Doctrine. When Russia put missiles in Cuba, we basically said that's not acceptable. A military association with possible bases and possible weapons systems would be a direct threat to Russia, and that they were reacting to this. It wasn't a desire to expand their territory. It wasn't a desire to subjugate all their neighbors. And in fact, the National Security Archives just 2 weeks ago released an unclassified version through the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, the memorandum of conversation between Putin and George W. Bush in Sochi in April of 2008, in which Putin, and it's online, anyone can read it, it was just released right before Christmas, that Putin told President Bush, he objected to NATO expansion because it would cause a direct confrontation and conflict between the US and Russia, and that this would be unacceptable for Russia to have Ukraine in NATO, and that ultimately this would lead to a split in the country between the pro-Russia western part of Ukraine and the more pro-European western part of Ukraine, or more ethnically Ukrainian, and the eastern part primarily more ethnically Russian. So the question I have is, since the administration hasn't completely come out and said we're going to support this narrative of how the war started, but the statements they've made, including one just the other day by Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff, which is kind of the might makes right, that great powers have a right to intervene when they believe their national security is threatened. He was talking about, obviously, the U.S. and Venezuela. But Putin could make a very similar statement to justify why they've gone into Ukraine. It's not that they want to occupy Ukraine. They want to deny that territory. They want to create a buffer there between the NATO forces and the rest of Western Europe and themselves. And it looks like after next month, it'll mark 4 years of conflict. It does not look like there's a military solution that would result in Ukraine capturing really any of the territory that they've lost. Now, people can differ on that, and people are different. Well, the question is, what do you see as the outcome if, in fact, there's some kind of a resolution, and whether it's a ceasefire or whether it's Ukraine sues for peace, but and this is the coalition of the willing, will the Europeans continue to try to provide security guarantees? Will they continue to try to send troops into the part of Ukraine, what we would call the rump state Ukraine, for lack of a better term? And will this continue to aggravate Russia? And will Russia respond by, again, having hybrid attacks, flying drones into airspace? Isn't it in the economic interest? And I know that Hungary, in particular, continues to import natural gas and other natural resources from Russia. Isn't it ultimately... Okay. Okay, will do.
You covered many things, because obviously the question is, was the idea to transform European political architecture after all the changes in 89 and 90 right one? There was an expectation of Mikhail Gorbachev to build a common European house. Then the Soviet Union disappeared and was replaced by the Russian Federation. I don't want to speak too much, but we should go back to these times. Obviously, I was part of these discussions in early 1990s, so we all wanted to return to Europe, and returning to Europe for us meant to be integrated to all these institutions that have been existing in this part of the world for some time, and we tried to do our best. The story of our integration to European communities, now European Union, and so on and so forth, is an interesting one. Václav Havel, when he was here and giving his speech in the US Congress in February of 1990, he said very paradoxical thing. He said, if you want to help us on our way to democracy, help the Soviet Union, because obviously they are in a much more difficult situation. And he also said that problem of the Soviet Union is that it doesn't know where its borders are. Look, in the fall of 1992, Andrej Kozyrev, quite liberal, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, in my mind was the first who used the term "dear abroad," which means territories not within the Soviet Union, or the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation wanted to claim certain, I would say, strategic interest. And obviously, till today, the question is how far the dear abroad is to go, and we can talk about Moldova and Georgia and all countries in and so forth. But the whole idea of NATO enlargement January of 1993, this NATO summit in Brussels, Partnership for Peace proposal was suggested to all communist countries, but at the same time there was the Russia-NATO entity. So they were at fault how to do it right. But then, obviously, I agree that the decision 2008 concerning Ukraine was seen by the Russian government as a threat or danger. I am optimistic because all these solutions now being searched is some reasonable security guarantees for Ukraine. Not as a membership of NATO, but something else, but maybe similar to Article 5 of Washington Treaty. At the same time, some arrangements, because it's obviously clear that all territories now controlled by Russian Federation cannot be brought back. So some sort of interim solution. We have some examples from the past. We can start from Korea, Vietnam, and some other places. So I think that it is doable. For Donald Trump, I think is very interesting the opportunity of reconstruction of these territories and capability of all sorts of businesses to be developed there. I'm afraid that for 1 year, 2 years, any peaceful solution is no-go, because for him the continuation of the war is maybe more attractive solution. If he is able to do it, it's a question now with this situation in Venezuela. I think that Russians made a lot of mistakes. Obviously, their system of defense in Caracas turned out to be zero and effective. Trump also said that this allegation that Ukrainians were trying to send drones to one of his residences was a false statement. Now, what's happening with all these papers, with Russian flags? So I think that Putin now maybe is a little bit in a weakened position with this new situation. That the solution is not going to be that we have our empire in Western Hemisphere, we have yours, with your leader abroad there, so we will give you Ukraine and you will give us all these countries starting with Venezuela. But again, let's wait and see what's going to happen. How the situation is going to evolve here and there, and I'm not that pessimistic. And in this context, I think it's extremely important to support Russian alternatives, to find a way how to talk about the Russian situation, not only being fascinated by Vladimir Putin and people around him. Maybe people around him already know that something wrong is going on because the economic situation of Russian Federation is not very promising, not very good. And partnership of cooperation with China for Russia is rather danger. Not the perspective that some sort of partnership that can be used against the Western civilization.
Thank you. Just one short comment. I think if Russia really wanted a buffer zone, it did have one. That's what Ukraine was until the war. It was totally stuck between, the a security situation of the rest of Europe and Russia. So it should have been just happy the way it was, and I think that's was totally counterproductive. But I also would like to say that as a Central European who strongly believes in, in our own self-determination and in our own national values and in our own kind of national will, I strongly believe that it's our right to define where we want to belong, with what institution, what international structure. And we did make that decision. We made it very clear with Poland, but starting in the Baltics, we made that decision very clear. I understand that Russia has a totally different historic experience, not just in Russian history since 1990, not just in Soviet history, or even in pre-Soviet Russian history. Maria will tell us if it's correct or not. There has not been one structure that would have been created by the Russian Soviet Tsarist leadership would have created, which would have attracted a single tiny little nation to want to join them. They always had to conquer militarily, they always had to replace the leadership, they had to install some political framework. So for them, to come a small, stupid little country like, this under 10 million Hungary, and say, that, yeah, we want to belong to NATO, it's like a hoax. It's like, of course they have no idea what they want to do, because every nation has to be coerced into some kind of a bigger structure, right? That's Russian history. So they have no understanding of this sovereign will of a nation. I get that. But that doesn't mean that it does not exist. I think it's a problem that they don't understand. We should be really kind of developing more ties culturally to try to explain it to them, that there is such a will such a thing as a free will of a country. And I think we did have that after 1990, that historic moment when we could express what we wanted. I'm super happy that we had the window of opportunity to actually implement that and become parts of the European Union and become parts of NATO. And I think it's superbly important. And on that basis, I have to say that I want to make sure that the system that we develop in the world will allow the same kind of an openness and the same understanding and respect of other people's will as I was expecting, or we were expecting as Central Europeans after 1990, and we were lucky to have. So I think, we should be reaching out more towards, with this understanding of, different narratives in history. But that doesn't mean that there's any legitimacy in imposing a political will on other countries.
Nice meeting you guys. Well, looks like the United States is pulling out of Europe in a certain way and trying to reduce its role in NATO. So then the question for the European countries is, number one, are they going to find the political will to compensate this with their own investment in defense and growing their armed forces and all that stuff? And then, very important question that sounds like a taboo, but it's going to come very soon. If you remember, the definition of NATO is to keep the Russians out and the Germans down. And so now, if the American absence opens space, some very old intra-European issues are going to come. Germany versus France, all your Central European, Austro-Hungarian, Catholic versus Orthodox. So, I mean, we're just kind of talking here as if Europe is some unified thing and Russia is some. Actually, Europe is a very complex system full of contradictions, and those contradictions have been suppressed for the after-war period. And now there's going to be space for those to reemerge. So I'll be interested in your opinion about those things and where do you see things maybe developing there.
My short answer would be to this. I think, yes, in a way, it's a shock to the Europeans. On the other hand, it's a very welcome, pressure, because the Europeans do need to get their act together, or we Europeans, we need to get our act together. And I very much welcome the opportunity from both kind of external forces, one from Russia to push us to kind of start thinking about, our strategic interests, and also from the US, pushing the Europeans to start thinking about our own strategic identity. And so I think this might be, okay, I'm a Hungarian, so pessimism is my birthright. And so I claim that. It's like, but with all my pessimism, I have to say that in this historic moment, I believe that Europe may have a chance to become a real strategic partner of the US, which is something that the US is what the US is saying, that this is what the US wants. And this is, I think, very much in the European interest as well. I think it's very much important. So I think it's a strategic moment. I think there is a strategic understanding. There is a pressure from the Russians. There is a pressure from Washington. This might be the best moment also because we do have the financial and economic means for that. There is the money for this. So yes, we have to restructure budgets. Yes, we have to rethink everything, but don't tell me we don't have the money. We do. So I think it's possible financially. So the question is, do we manage to keep this momentum or to grab this momentum and create that strategic identity that will have to have some military capabilities that are badly missing? And so, yes, it will take some time. And the second question is, will the US understand that, yes, we are on a path to achieve that, but it's not going to happen overnight. And we need, 3 years, 4 years, I don't know, a very foreseeable time, not 10 years or not, 20, but a little time until then. And ultimately, and my last thought on this is that although the US seems to be withdrawing from Europe in general now, I think, there's a clear understanding of the importance of China. We do understand the importance of China as well. We just have to be sharing a lot more information. So, the US have to share a lot more information on what they understand and know about China, which the Europeans don't. Because for the moment, the Europeans don't have that ability, that intelligence about China that the US does. We do have a platform for that, NATO. It should be much more, we have a gap of strategic threat analysis. And the Europeans have been, yes, sleeping in many ways for a couple of decades of not understanding what China is about. But if the US has that information, maybe that's the time now to kind of bring us closer and narrow the gap. But what I wanted to say is that ultimately I believe that the US, Russia is a problem right now that the Europeans cannot solve without the US, because of the lack of military industrial capacity. So we have to develop that much faster than we ever did before. But even if we do it, double fast, it's going to take some time. So yes, Russia is a problem that the Europeans cannot solve without the Americans. But I very much believe also that China is a problem that the Americans cannot solve without the Europeans and other partners. No. It's an assumption. No, before I spoke about that before, but let me, no, I don't think Europe is a unified unity. Totally, I agree with you. And that's what I said, that there's elections in all of these countries, and the current leadership, that leadership in many of those countries that currently created the coalition of the willing, which I think is a potential platform for a strategic European identity to take muscle and get, the capabilities, that can fall apart. There's a massive Russian interest in both in the UK, in France, in Germany, to support AfD, to support, yes, to undermine this. There is a big, a threat for that. I agree with that. So I don't assume that. I know it's going to be very difficult, but I know that either this or kind of
Europe, because obviously something that has been working for decades after the Second World War is now again on a new construct. So Europe really needs to redefine itself, not just the soft power, hard power situation, but being militarily able to make European choices. Obviously now the biggest question is that Greenland and what's going to happen there, whether Trump is going to go too far or whether it is just his game. And in the end of the day, it will not lead to the end of NATO, because obviously any aggression in this context would be a devastating thing. So again, Andrej will give give us information. You said Russia out, Germany down. You know, this is the old concept. I think that we had in the past European, German Europe, which was maybe Adolf Hitler's concept, or European Germany, which is what Germans tried to do after the Second World War. The fact that they were trying to keep their military capabilities down, and now they are building maybe the biggest armies in Europe. Is there new information, and we need to work with that? Obviously, French perspective is slightly different. It's European defense capabilities, European forces in the context of European Union, how you can mingle NATO in that. This is an ongoing discussion that history and will keep going now. Obviously, it is also a question of timing. How much time do Europeans need to build their own infrastructures and so on and so forth? It's a question of military spending. Maybe the Trump's 5% requirement is maybe too much, but Europeans actually need to look at that. So I would think it's reality. Europe needs to do more, and obviously relationship and communication in the United States, whoever is in the White House, is extremely important. So I would be very cautious to put myself to critique of Trump and to build on these differences. Europe is secularized, woke-ish, and country space that somewhat eliminated or thrown away the values Europe was built up on. All these questions are relevant, but you always need to have a way how to address this issue, how to deal with these questions, and not just to end up with some sort of dead ends or conflict that has no solution. Last thing, Czech philosopher Jan Pavel, one of his last texts, found on his desk before he passed away, his concept of capitalism, was about the end of Europe and arrival of post-European. And his argument was very simple. In the 19th century, the world was Eurocentric. There were European countries and colonies, and maybe the United States was a little distinction, but the 20th century was about these big errors. The United States and then the Soviet Union replacing Europe in that respect. So we have to accept the fact that Europe is now maybe one of the regions among other regions of the world. But still there are certain European basic principles and values and things Europe needs to be aware of and share it with all others. And really this is, I think, for me, why we need to defend democracy. Democracy is complicated and maybe not the best way how you can control human things. But all other alternatives, all these autocracies are certainly rather dangerous, and we need to find a way how to deal with this issue. And maybe communication on level of ideas between religions is all people would will. I think it's maybe psychotic, but very important part of what you do now.
Look, we're unfortunately running out of time of sitting here, but we still have an opportunity to continue with drinks. And before we're doing that, I would like just to use my power and to ask my own question to Martin mostly, I think. But if so I know I heard it so many times. A big supporter of Spirit of Helsinki, and I wouldn't like to undermine the meaning of 1975 final act and the stuff, but in the current context, it sounds like way to seek like compromise with Moscow, and personally, I don't like it. And my question actually is about how you and Havel and like-minded people in 1975 perceived this, passage to peaceful coexistence, which would, to a certain extent, would betray 1968 and.
I will give you a historically correct version. Václav Havel, in April of 1975, wrote this famous letter to Dr. Husák, who was then Secretary General of Communist Party, in which he articulated our existential feelings that it looked like that Czechoslovak society was well-fed, people were not protesting very much, but they were all pushed to live in without freedom, and Havel tried to describe that situation. In that moment, he had no idea that Dr. Husák would become a president within a few days because he was only Secretary General of Communist Party. It was something happening somewhere else. And then that in this capacity, he would go to Helsinki to sign the final act. For Charter 77, this final act was not, you said that it was our betrayal, that because West recognized all these 10 principles, which means non-intervention in domestic matters, and Brezhnev thought that he won. But it turned out that it was not the case. Helsinki process started something new. And, I could talk a lot about that, because it was not just East-West, NATO, Warsaw Pact countries led by their the hegemons, but smaller countries like Finland, Switzerland, and others, out of sudden had their chance and platform to do something. If Charter 77 was not able and ready to step into this space, nothing much would have been changed in Czechoslovakia. But, it took us some time, 13 years, and out of sudden we had a chance to become an international factor. We started to have a, U.S. embassy in Prague certainly was not 100% on side of Charter 77, but whenever U.S. official delegations, congressional delegations from administration were coming to visit Czechoslovak government, we were invited to the embassy and to have a conversation with them. Obviously, for Helsinki process, the key thing was the 1985 when Gorbachev got in power in Moscow, and out of sudden situation really changed dramatically. Look, I am aware that 2026 is, we are living a different era. I was in Helsinki. I was the only Czech person invited to that event on the 31st of July last year. President Stubb had an opening statement, and Finnish foreign minister was there all the time. And they decided to present that as an inspiration, not only as a remembrance of the past, but as an inspiration for the future. And obviously, I cannot tell you what it is what's going to happen. But Denis, please read what Alexander Stubb wrote a couple of weeks ago. He still believes in it. He's not a stupid idiot. He is a clever European politician. And, 28 European countries already are contributing to the future Helsinki Fund. I understand that this entity sitting in Vienna is not, organization It's maybe well, Russians have their own representation. It might be a little bit sclerotized, but the spirit is something that I think has a chance. And I don't want to be fanatic or illusionist. Let's see what's going to happen, and we might be surprised before the end of this year.
Thank you very much for coming, and you're very welcome to join us for the drinks and continue networking.
I have an extended contact. You did?